Assalamu alaikum, and today I want to talk about some things that have been on my mind. I do want to say, first of all, that I am by no means an expert, and any sources that I use I will list in the description area. So, as of now, we are now all aware climate change is happening and has been occurring for decades. Animals are becoming endangered and extinct. Bleaching of the coral reefs is happening in the oceans. The temperature of the ocean is rising, causing glaciers and ice to melt on the polar caps. Bizarre weather patterns, stronger hurricanes, droughts, warm and mild winters, etc., are happening. Climate change also impacts people all over the world. There are people who are displaced from their countries as a direct result from climate change. Here are some excerpts from the UN Refugee Agency. Start quote. Environmental degradation and natural disasters increasingly interact with the drivers of refugee movements. End quote. So what that basically means is that there's that climate change is one of the factors for refugees. Obviously, you got to put into account wars and other factors, but you can't deny that things like drought and bad crops and livestock play a role in people's ability to have food and other sources of water and things like that. And here's another quote from the same place. People are trying to adapt to the changing environment, but many are being forcibly displaced from their homes by the effects of climate change and disasters, or are relocating to survive. End quote. So, yeah, like people are trying to adapt to all these changes, but there's only so much you could do. And people are going from living off their land to surviving. And according to the Guardian.com article from September 2020, the title is called Climate Crisis Could Displace 1.2 billion people by 2015, report warns. This is what they have to say. More than 1 billion people face being displaced within 30 years as the climate crisis and rapid population growth drive an increase in migration with huge impacts for both developing and developed worlds. End quote. 1 billion people by 2050. Let that sink in. Right now, we have about 7 billion people in the world. 1/7 of the world's population could be negatively impacted by the results of climate change. From the same article in The Guardian, the Institute for Economics and Peace, IEP, a think tank that produces annual global terrorism and peace indexes, said 1.2 billion people lived in 31 countries that are not sufficiently resilient to withstand ecological threats. 19 countries facing the highest numbers of threats, including water and food shortages and greater exposure to natural disasters, are also among the world's 40 least peaceful countries. The IEP's first ecological threat. This will have huge social and political impacts not just in the developing world but also in the developed, as a mass displacement will lead to larger refugee flows to the most developed countries, Steve Killia, the Institute's founder, says. So from The Guardian. Ecological threats pose serious challenges to global peace. Over the next 30 years, lack of access to food and water will only increase without urgent global cooperation. In the absence of action, civil unrest, riots, and conflict will most likely increase. So that's a lot of words. What did I just read? Essentially, that the global climate climate change is not only an ecological one, but one that really threatens the sovereignty of nations and peoples. Because if you don't have access to food, if your food is scarce, if your water is scarce, if you're not able to produce crops, if your livestock is dying, if you're forced to move because your land cannot provide what it needs to be providing, and you're going to neighboring countries and living on and being displaced, it's going to cause a lot more refugees. And also, you have to put into consideration too that climate change is not the only issue that people face too. There could be other factors such as wars in that region, or etc., right? So I think it's important for us to really start taking action against climate change, because one, obviously you should care for the earth, but I feel like sometimes that's not a driving factor for people. But just think of the humanity. Think of the people who are currently right now being negatively impacted by insufficient land or weather or whatever. And the thing is too, like, people like and refugees, it's a very harsh way of living. um not everyone is always granted into these nations or given like amnesty or whatever. So it's a very like harsh reality. According to Wikipedia, an environmental migrant are people who are forced to leave their home region due to sudden or long-term changes in their local environment. These changes compromise their well-being or secure livelihood and include increased drought, desertification, sea level rise, and disruption of seasonal weather patterns. According to climateforesight.eu, there are currently 64 million forced migrants in the world fleeing wars, hunger, persecution, and a growing force, climate change. UN forecasts estimate that there could be anywhere between 25 million and 1 billion environmental migrants by 2050. So I think it's about time that we really consider climate change. In many ways, I don't know, this might be a series because honestly, it's something that upsets me and I should have done more research. I'm kind of just reading up on it now as I'm telling you. Take a deep breath. Okay. So here's the thing, right? We need to stop asking politicians if they believe in climate change, because the reality is climate change is here. That's like asking someone if they believe in the laws of gravity. Whether or not they believe in gravity, you drop an apple, it's gonna fall, right? And same thing with climate change. It's not whether or not, hey, do you believe in this? Like, it's not like some philosophical thing. It's scientifically proven. We have had hotter and hotter years. We've had rising sea levels. We have had droughts. We have had less access to clean drinking water. We have had so many disasters as a result of climate change. And we really need to put a stop to it, because not only are we impacting the environment that we live in and putting animals at risk, we're endangering the lives of humans. Humans. Not because of war. I mean, obviously, there's war and stuff. Not because of war, but and stuff like that. Climate change, their environment. If you can't live off your land and you're forced to move, you are being negatively impacted by global change. We really need to urge our leaders to take a stand against climate change and really invest in saving our earth. Because I mean, on a small scale, honestly, your average person doesn't have control of it. But the corporations and the governments are that have more power and influence over how climate change deals and regulations are met are a lot higher than the individuals. So I urge you to really reach out to your leaders and tell them that this is something that you care about and that is really concerning, because we should really care about people.